What could you do to protect your pets if you're sick or injured? My product, Save My Pet ID tag, helps you ensure that your beloved pets are safe and well cared for, even when life isn't what you expect.
Our special guest is a friend and a friend to all of us and our pets, and his name is Stephen Applebaum. And you know it from Animal Behavior College. After the show, give us the website real quick before I forget.
Sure. It's www.animalbehaviorcollege.com.
So we're going to go back in time. We're in a time capsule. Is that all right, Steve? I brought popcorn.
Sure.
That's cool. All right. So we're going back in time, and you're in the United States Air Force. And somehow you're hooked up with dogs? What's going on?
It was a SPK9 handler in the service. This is a long time ago. Obviously, after we learned how to fly. It's funny you talk about the time machine. I know that everybody over the age of 50 will appreciate this. Whenever you're on your computer and you're doing a drop-down box where they're asking for your birthday and you have to keep scrolling before you get there. That's how you know.
I don't know anything about that. No, go ahead. Go for it.
Not you, of course. You're getting younger every year. I got into that because originally I was interested in a career in law enforcement.
Okay.
And it seemed to me that this would be a great way to segue and take my experience and apply it to hopefully getting a job in law enforcement. But what happened was I realized that people go into law enforcement for a whole host of different reasons. And I understood those reasons. There was a tremendous appeal for me, but I also realized that it wasn't going to be my path, that I didn't want to do that for the next 20 or 30 years, even though I had tremendous appreciation for what's done in law enforcement. But I had thousands of hours of dog experience, okay, which was just an accident. When I went into service, it was post-Vietnam, but before the military became more of a popular destination. And so I was just in that sort of weird window where I was able to...
Where were you? Where did you grow up, Steve?
I'm originally from New York, born in Brooklyn, grew up on Long Island, but my folks moved the family west when I was a teenager. From the age of 14, we came to live in Southern California. Okay. And I can tell you that it was a very different place then. Now, I didn't grow up when I was in New York, I didn't grow up, as I said, I was on Long Island. So it's not like I was in the city, but New York was a lot different than LA. It still is. And so I did some growing up there, some growing up here. Anyway, when I got out of service, I had no idea what I was really going to do when I grew up. But I had all this dog experience, and I figured I can train. Maybe I'll just come back to Southern California and see if I can make a living doing something that I was pretty good at and liked doing, which was training dogs. Is this a hobby? Is this something I can do part-time? Is this something I can do full-time? And so I did. I came back here and I started training. And I found within the first year that I had about all the business I could handle. In fact, within 2 years, I was starting to hire other trainers.
You went to Hollywood, didn't you?
I did go to Hollywood. It's funny. I had connected when I came back to LA. This was like late 80, early 1981. And I connected with some motion picture animal trainers out here.
Nice.
And I liked the idea of training for motion pictures. Mm-hmm. But the challenge I had there was a kind of feast or famine existence.
Yeah.
And they also, in order to get into that business, you typically had to do very long apprenticeships with these old guard trainers, where essentially you cleaned kennels and worked basically for free. And I figured, you know what? I just spent 4 years doing that.
Yeah. And you also had to salute a lot.
Yes. One thing led to another, and I started my own business, and things took off from there.
So let's keep going, because what I'm seeing in you is you realize you have a talent and an affinity for training, but it's one at a time. And we were getting into the age where people are using something called a computer, and people were starting to use distance learning and things like that.
Sure.
So how did you come up with the idea? I think I'm going to create a school, but it's not going to be.
So that evolved gradually. First, When I first got into training as a civilian, the internet didn't exist, or if it did, it was part of a dark bar or whatever. It certainly wasn't anything that civilians were using. Personal computers were still in the future. And so basically, when I set up my first business, it was all private lessons. After about 4 or 5 years of that, I recognized that I wanted to offer group classes for a couple of different reasons. First, because my private clients still needed me after 5 or 6 or 8 lessons, but they didn't need me privately. Really, what they needed at that point was for me to keep my eye on them in a group class scenario. Plus, I knew that my market was limited in private lessons. Groups were less expensive. And so this was just another thing I could offer my clients, as well as offer potentially another business. But I wasn't sure where to promote it. Most of my business was coming from veterinary referrals. And I didn't want to go back to the veterinary contacts that I had made, essentially promoting a business that was a fraction of the cost of my first one. So instead, I went to a pet store that had opened, and I presented them with what at the time was a novel concept, which was, I would like to do a class through your store. The first lesson is not going to be with the dogs. It's just going to be we called them owners back then, pet parents now. And essentially, the first lesson is going to be a lecture in which we discuss behavioral challenges, which is why most people wanted to come to group anyway, equipment they were going to need. And then after that, we would meet at a location outside of the store. And they had never been approached this way. I wasn't selling the equipment, they were. The store was. And so this was tremendously successful. I was working with some independent pet stores, and they were bought out by a large pet chain that we've all heard of, Petco.
Yeah, let me interject. I think the date here, we're now back into the 90s now, 1994. I just want to speed up a little bit, but
Eat it up.
You got Petco in its when it was wearing diapers. That's
right.
Pretty amazing.
That's right. Yeah, they weren't they were interested in a one-shop stopping concept.
Yeah.
I had this service. And so part of it was being in the right place at the right time. Part of it wasn't being smart enough to be scared. And so one thing led to another.
I always like that. That's my mantra. I wasn't smart enough to know to be scared. That's a good mantra. I think I'm going to get a t-shirt that says that.
Yeah, you have to grab the opportunities, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So by 1994, we signed a contract with Petco, initially for the state of California, but ultimately for their entire chain, which led to, the company expanded. At its peak, we had about 550 trainers in 44 states, but I had a problem. And the problem was I couldn't find trainers, not as many as I needed. And so that led me to conclude that the way around this was to grow my own. And that's how the school started. Now, by now, we're talking 1996, 97. The internet is becoming a thing. And so we create a distance learning program coupled with a hands-on component where the students actually, now in those days, we did it through the Petco stores because I still had that arrangement with them. But we quickly divested ourselves of that so that by the time Petco bought me out of my company and they took the program in home, which they still have, but it's theirs now and has been since 2004, the school was a completely separate entity, standalone, and the rest is history. So that's the short version of how this happened.
Everybody, we're speaking with Stephen Applebaum. He's the man, the genius behind Animal Behavior College. We're going to dive in a little bit deeper after we take this break. So, sit, stay, or purr. We'll be right back.
Hey, have you heard? Four-Legged Life has a new digital newsletter. Here, let me show you how you get yourself subscribed. So you just type in Four-Legged Life, and that'll take you to the website. There we go. And this magic thing just appears, and you type in your email address. I'll use, let's see, how about coolestdogever@gmail.com. That's me. And then you just click on this thing here. There you go. It's the new digital newsletter from Four-Legged Life. Get subscribed today.
Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Arden Moore. I'm talking with my buddy, Steve Applebaum. I love how he shared the evolution of how a guy from the Air Force with dealing with handling dogs just kept going with the different decades and kept seeing this evolution. And because you were living in California, riding the crest of a training wave, wouldn't you say?
Yes, absolutely. Attitudes and methods have changed over the last 40 years. But the idea that pets were a member of the family, that certainly was not considered a radical notion in 1980. 1980, the early 80s into the 90s, that's not the 1880s. Although it certainly seems that way to some people when I make a reference to something and they say, I wasn't born yet. But
we still love those youngsters. Come on.
Oh, yes. Yes, I love talking to somebody and talking very briefly. I remember having a person working in my office. I don't know, somehow we were talking about events of national prominence. And I asked her, okay, so what's the earliest event you remember? I know you don't remember the moonwalk. And she looks at me with this perfect 23-year-old contempt. And she says, now this is 15 years ago. And she says, Steve, I've seen Michael Jackson videos. I know what I swear.
Oh, all right. That's good. That's good. That's okay. You can always be a ageless wonder. Take that, Michael Jackson and moon astronauts. So ABC, I'm going to brag for you because you have built this and you have trained, is it over 30,000 people in different areas? And you started off in dog training, but can I read this list real quick? Let me see. 7 core programs: dog training, service dog training, cat training, pet grooming, veterinary assisting. Oh, this is my favorite. The last 2 are my favorite. Aquarium maintaining and zookeeper assisting. Wow. Tame and wild for 200.
Yeah.
Steve, what made you branch off into all these areas?
Much of it was student and what we call prospect feedback.
Okay.
We started the dog trainer program in 1998. I quickly realized that it had tremendous potential. That we launched the veterinary assistant program in 2008, grooming in 2010. I really liked the idea of cat training because I'd been getting cat behavior questions since the 80s. And as people came to realize, hey, they're trainable, they're just trained differently and for different things. So we launched cat training. Then we did aquatics management.
When did you do the cat training? Do you remember?
I do. We started the cat training as a short-term program in 2011, but we got so much good feedback from it that we launched it as a main program. We just expanded it in 2016.
Okay.
So...
all right, glug.
Yeah.
You got some aquarium. You got some fish. Get your koi on.
That's right. Yeah, it's funny. When that was first presented to me, I didn't quite know what to make of that. I think my comment was, wait, we're going to train fish? What? When I came to understand what it was, and recognized that there is an absolute opportunity for people to not only start their own business, but if they want to work in a pet store, and that can be a great way to get experience.
Yeah.
To have that knowledge makes them potentially very valuable employees. And ultimately,
you're talking like salt water, fresh water. Is there some little factoid you can share with everybody that might surprise people about aquarium maintenance?
Well, the aquarium maintenance, I believe, is worth about $4.5 billion a year. In this country,
that's a lot of chum.
Yeah, it is. And although some people have a hard time considering them pets, I don't. I think they're wonderful. I believe that tropical fish are the most popular pet kept in the United States.
Wow.
Just because of the sheer numbers. You can have 4 or 5 fish in a tank, at least.
You can't have 4 or 5 Rottweilers in a tank. That just wouldn't make it. Yeah.
Yes, you could. 4 or 5 bassets.
All right. Here's the other one. This one really, I love this one. And you have now ventured into zookeeping assistant. And you actually, it's my understanding, I was trying to do my homework. You actually have a special scholarship in the name of the person, all of us, who's a friend to all of us, a real golden girl. So Talk about that, because I'm pretty curious about, you realized in the world of zoos, they need help.
Absolutely. And with the zookeeper, zoos and exotic animal rescues run into a similar problem that veterinary hospitals run into, that really animal-related businesses frequently run into, which is many people love the idea of working with animals, especially exotic animals, my gosh, but they don't recognize or they don't understand what's really involved. In their mind's eye, they're going to be playing with a lion or something. And so you get a lot of volunteers. But once the reality, which is it can be difficult,
Yeah.
at times dangerous, but often tedious work. It's wonderfully rewarding, but you need to go into this with eyes wide open. And you need to have some basic understanding, safety protocols, basic knowledge of what you're dealing with. And so that program was designed for people that wanted to get into this as an entry level so that they weren't just wide-eyed volunteers.
I really like that because you don't go up to a puma and say, here, kitty.
No, sometimes people, it's not that their hearts aren't in the right place. They are. You've been in the animal industry long enough to know that people are in this in part because they're following their hearts. And that's fabulous. You also need to have a clear understanding of what you're getting into, because the more you understand that, the more likely you are to get a job or to be accepted as a volunteer. So we did this for that. And also because we thought it would just be an extremely cool program.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you said it like that. What do you think about the fact that you've never put yourself in a little corner? You've always looked at other options. Is that something you inherited from your parents when you were in the Air Force? Where do you get this notion that, well, why don't we try this?
I'm good on some things and not as good on others. One of the things I'm good at is I'm pretty good at analyzing trends.
Okay,
So I
so
can
you're not
see
wearing
that.
bell bottoms anymore, right? Or-
I can say no on Zoom, and since you can only see me from the waist up.
No, this is
no,
going
I'm
on
not wearing
YouTube too.
bell-bottoms. I'm not wearing bell-bottoms. No, look, it is important as a business person to be flexible enough to understand changes and trends. Had you told me 10 or 15 years ago that my company would have social media ambassadors, I would have looked at you strangely. But you evolve, or you don't. But if you don't, especially in business, you do run the risk of running into problems. So I've had I'm decent on that. And
I did want to get back to the scholarship name because she's up in heaven. She's been on our show. She's in heaven. You better say her name.
Betty White was an inspiration to all of us. I also met her only once. Yeah, just a fabulous human being.
I like that you named it in honor of her for the zookeeper scholarship. That's really well done.
With tremendous respect and appreciation for and you talk about a pioneer. She was talking about things 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago even, that just weren't on a lot of people's radar. But she was consistent for a very long time. And we're very honored to live in her shadow, I think. She was wonderful.
So we're almost out of time. I can't believe it. We got to have you back. But what's a parting message you want to give all of us out there that are lucky to share our life with a pet or two, and the importance of knowing behavior and the importance of getting properly trained in schools like Animal Behavior College if you want to pursue a career?
Imparting a nugget of wisdom for just...
Yes, give us a nugget of wisdom. Betty White from heaven is listening right now. I can promise you.
Love, patience, and understanding, which I realize are eye-rolling cliches, but it's true. Patience, extremely important. I struggle with that sometimes. I know I'm not alone. I come from a place of love and from a place of understanding. Recognize that dogs and cats are intelligent beings. They're not human beings, and it's important not to consider them as human beings, which doesn't mean you don't love them. It just means that they communicate differently. And since it's not likely they're going to be learning too much of our language, they'll learn some, okay, and they'll learn our body language. It's critically important for us to understand where they're coming from. That's true in dealing with behavioral challenges, in general communication, in teaching them to respond. Do it with kindness because you're going to be better off in the long run. As far as getting involved,
it is a conversation, whether it's verbal or nonverbal, you should always have with your pet. That's what I hear you're saying.
right.
It's
That
not
is
you
absolutely
telling
right.
them, it's a conversation.
No, that's right. Sometimes you can tell them, but if you're going to do that, you need to do it in a way that it's most likely to be understood and understood positively by them. As far as people wanting to get involved in this as a career, yes, the pet industry is a huge and growing industry. It is about 60% larger than the toy business in the United States. It's massive. And there are numerous ways to get involved, whether you want to work with cats or dogs or be in veterinary or grooming or work in animal rescue or with exotics. There are lots of opportunities. You can certainly check out our school. And frankly, since the internet can be a scary but wonderful place, there is a ton of information out there, but all of it true, of course. No, a ton of information out there about pet careers. Do your research, do your homework, invest your time before you invest your money, as the old saying goes. But if this is a passion, don't be afraid to follow it.
Thanks so much for making our tails wag by watching this guest interview from Arden Moore's Four-Legged Life. Four-Legged Life. Make sure to subscribe so you're up to date with all of our Four-Legged Life content.